Hello all, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com. I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek M4A4 Sherman tank. Since the last video update, a lot of progress has been made to the model, and the model is currently about 95% complete. We'll be going over the model's progress in this video. As we can see, the most obvious change that has been made to the model was that of the model's exterior. Since the last video, the tank has been painted, weathered, as well as having its markings applied. Starting with the model's paint, the entire tank after the last video was primed and painted with its base coat. For the tank's base color, I went with a different shade of olive drab than I use on my typical American tank projects that you see on my video listings, as well as on East Coast Armory. Because of the very early nature of this build, I went ahead and used an earlier lighter shade of olive drab that I have on hand. The same shade, that olive drab that you see on this vehicle, is the same shade of olive drab that I utilized on my M3 Lee project from a few years ago. That color itself I had custom mixed from a lot of the period photographs as well as color illustrations that I've seen of vehicles of the time. Another very prominent feature on this build, or on this paint scheme, is that of the white stripe that runs around the center of the turret. This type of marking setup was very common amongst Shermans as well as other American tanks from this early period of the war. Typically, the stripes that you see around the turret were mainly used on stateside type vehicles, which were mainly used in training operations. It would be very common to see vehicles with this type of a paint scheme in such Army bases as Fort Knox and as well as the Desert Training Center in California, where many of the M4A4s that were in U.S. service were stationed. Now, the turret stripe that you see here is only in white. However, there are several different variations of this type of setup that happen around the same time. In addition to a white stripe, yellow is also common, as well as white with blue. However, for the purpose of this build, I only went with the single white bar. While we're on the topic of the markings, all of the markings that you see on this vehicle, including the stars, the stripe, the TO&E markings, as well as the War Department markings on the rear, are all applied via homemade stencils. The stencils themselves are disposable and get destroyed after every use. However, the use of paint as opposed to decals for the models, in my opinion, give a more realistic appearance, in that, just like on the real vehicle, the markings on the real tanks were applied in the same fashion. This type of application for markings is the way I prefer to add markings on all of my 1/6 scale models. And as a close-up of the markings, here go the two front TO&E markings on the front transmission cover, along with the front star, the top air recognition star, along with the continuous band stripe, and the side turret star. Here we have the tank's name. The name itself is the only marking on the vehicle that's applied with hand, with that of a paintbrush. Moving our way to the rear portion of the vehicle, we have here the rear identification number. As we can see, the rear identification number on these early war tanks is a little bit different than on the later war vehicles, in that the color is a blue instead of white, and also we have the little W on the rear portion right before the numbers. The W indicates War Department. A little later in the war, the W was dropped, and we only have USA, and then the identification number that we have here. The final markings we have are on the rear panel, and those are the TO&E markings. They're the same exact numbers that are found on the front transmission cover, and are applied with the same format. In addition to the markings, most of the small detail fittings have been added. Starting with the front, we have here the addition of the clear lenses for the headlights. We also have the bow M1919 machine gun barrel now fitted. Also, while I'm on the front, we could see here, now that the tank is painted, the mill marks for two bow blister castings that we have here. Like I mentioned in an earlier video, the entire front hull is comprised of several components. Some made out of rolled steel, others cast. So you see the weld bead here that holds the entire unit together. Now, one thing of note about Shermans with this style blisters is that the casting, for some reason at the foundry, this version here for the assistant driver was an actual thicker casting than that of the driver blister. Because of that, the unit would not fit into the welding jig when it was time for assembly. To remedy this, more material was milled away from this section here in order to have the units fit together. The mill marks are found on both bow blisters, however, the assistant driver blister has slightly more material removed. Now that the vehicle is painted, you can see both mill marks a lot more clear than previously. The top of the turret, we can see here the vane sight. We notice that the shark fin vane sight is painted in red for higher visibility. I've seen several real Shermans that have this component painted like this. Directly next to the vane sight, we have the gunner scope, and the gunner scope prism has been painted to replicate that of glass. The interior portion of the copula has also been painted. This includes the headrest on the hatch, also on the surrounding ring, and also the periscope is another component that has been completely painted and installed. The vehicle's MP48 spring antenna base has also been painted, as when it comes to MP48s, they all have a dark amber red color for that of the insulator. As a note, I've seen many smaller scale builds in which this part here is ignored and just left in the base coat. This is not only inaccurate, but also really helps the look of the vehicle and makes it pop by adding that little amber red color to the insulator section here. As for which parts are the insulator, it's the three little rings that we have here in the center portion of the top half of the antenna base. In addition to painting the insulator, the knurled tip on both the top and the bottom have been painted. On the bottom, it's blue, and on the top, it's red. I've seen these colors used on real MP48 spring antenna bases. One advantage of the red painted tip on top, not only is it accurate, but it also gives a nice visual cue as a warning so that you could easily see it, so that when you're working on the vehicle or looking close to the vehicle, you don't accidentally poke your eye with the antenna. In addition to the bow M1919, the coaxial M19 has also been fitted. Like I mentioned earlier, it's connected to the main gun and elevates and depress along with the main gun and the gunner's periscope. Moving our way to the front portion of the gun, we can see that the powder fouling as well as the inner barrel steel color has been added. If we notice on my powder fouling, it's applied very, very mildly, and it's only on the extreme tip of the barrel. A common procedure that I've seen on many smaller scale builds is a lot of builders like to overemphasize the powder fouling on Model 10 gun barrels. The barrels themselves would never have that much powder fouling that would build up to the access that you would see on some smaller scale models. On these main guns, all of the expelling gases exit through the front of the barrel, and not only that, the barrels themselves are very well maintained by their crews and are always being swabbed and cleaned. So to have an excessive amount of powder fouling on the barrel is severely over-exaggerated. Moving our way to the rear portion of the model, we can see here on the rear deck fire extinguisher, the handles have been painted in red. The red painted handles is a common overlooked feature on many smaller scale builds, but once the handles are painted, not only increase the accuracy of the model, but also help make it pop a little bit as the red stands out from the base coat. In addition to the handles, if we notice, all the retention chains have been added for the fuel caps. In addition to the fuel cap chains themselves, the fuel caps have also been fabricated and mounted. The caps themselves are fabricated out of aluminum and are left in their natural color as they would be on the real vehicle. Only thing that was added to the fuel fillers was the aluminum itself was weathered to better match the rest of the look of the vehicle. The same feature was also done to the ECA radiator cover. The piece works in the exact same way as you pull the pin, and you have the interior portion. Like I mentioned in my other video, the fluid filler cap that we have here is included with the entire resin set. Also, if we notice, the bottom portion has been painted in black to replicate that of the radiator, which would be below the cover cap. Moving our way to the rear portion of the vehicle, the lenses for the taillights have also been fitted. If we notice, the version on the right hand side is blacked out, while the taillight lens on the left hand side has its top portion in red. Moving on to the lower suspension, we can see that all the Zerk fittings on the road wheels, as well as the return rollers, have been painted in red, as would be on the real vehicle. Last but not least, the tracks have also been painted and fixed to the vehicle. Now, unlike my static builds in which the tracks would get dry brushed with their scratched metal coloring, for this vehicle, that's all done naturally. Because the tank is all metal, the tracks were simply painted and then mounted to the tank. After a couple laps of a test drive, the bare metal that we see here begins to show through the paint as it would on the real track links themselves. Now, if we notice, the track links are not rusty or weathered in that type of format. Another common trait that you'll see on smaller scale models is that model makers tend to like to weather the tracks with that of rust. However, like I say in a lot of my other build videos, tracks on military vehicles have a high manganese content and are resilient to such things as rust as well as some other types of oxidation. The only time you do see tracks that are highly rusty are vehicles that have either caught fire or that have been outdoors and on display for several decades. Like I mentioned before, the tank is about 95 to 90% complete. All that needs to be added are the rear deck Pioneer tools as well as the M2 machine gun. But before I go ahead and add these last components, I might as well take the tank for one last test drive. Now, I'm currently filming the video around duskish, so once I activate the headlights and taillights, you should be able to see them on the video. update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek M4A4 Sherman tank. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook. And don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 scale tank builds, as well as other 1/6 scale detail components. Thank you.